A couple decides to get a divorce, but the situation becomes complicated. Tim's ex-wife's behavior scares him. Over time, he will realize that his fears were justified. Tim and Larissa go through a very difficult divorce, in which the main problem is money. She is not willing to share half of her assets with her ex-husband and makes a decision that will change the course of events forever. Larissa Foreman was born on January 1, 1960, on a farm in Clarence, Missouri, USA. Her parents were Charles and Diane Foreman. The young girl led a peaceful life on the family farm. She was an outstanding student and assistant at the University of Missouri, where she earned a degree in biochemistry. During her higher education, Larissa worked at a hospital where she met Larissa Shuster, who also grew up on a farm in Golden, a village in Illinois. At that time, he was studying to become a nurse. Soon after they met, feelings developed between them, and courtship began that lasted for about 3 years. In 1982, they got married, and in 1985, their daughter named Kristen was born. 4 years later, Larissa found a great, well-paying job at an agricultural crop research laboratory located in Fresno, California. It was an opportunity they couldn't pass up, so the family moved to the city. Larissa excelled in her job. She was a professional in her field and also an entrepreneur. It wasn't long before she opened her own laboratory specializing in agricultural biochemistry. In 1990, the couple had their second child, a son named Tyler. For Larissa at that time, managing all her responsibilities, home, children, and her new business was a very tough task. She would leave home at 6:30 in the morning and return at 7:30 in the evening, clearly exhausted. They agreed that Tim would temporarily put his career on hold to take care of the children and manage household chores. This arrangement worked for a while, but then Tim wanted to return to work. He planned to take short shifts at the hospital and thus be able to spend time at home with his children and handle household responsibilities. Both of their work efforts started bearing fruit, and shortly after opening their company, they moved into a larger, luxurious house. It seemed like everything was going well. They appeared to be an ideal family. They attended church, and Tim was a member of the local Masonic Lodge. But behind closed doors, the situation was quite different. After 21 years of marriage, their relationship was shattered. The cause of their constant arguments was money, not because they lacked it, but quite the opposite. Larissa was investing hundreds of thousands of dollars into her company, and Tim was doing the same. With his hospital shifts and several extra jobs, he managed to save up $77,000 per year. This made their lives very comfortable, but since Tim earned half of what Larissa did, she criticized him for his complacency and lack of ambition. In 2001, she confessed to having cheated on him in 1993. Starting in 2002, their relationship hit a standstill, and they decided to get divorced. In the process, two main issues emerged: custody of their younger son, Tyler, and the division of marital assets. In February 2002, Larissa filed for divorce and also submitted a second application for custody of their son. She was not willing to give up anything she considered earned through her own efforts and accused Tim of being useless and making money. Initially, they decided to split their home into two parts due to its size, but Larissa wanted to keep everything for herself. She felt that Tim had no right to enjoy the prosperity she had created, in her words, on her own. Tim disagreed with Larissa's comments. He argued that while he didn't contribute economically to purchases like the house, cars, and other items, he played a role in raising their children and caring for the home. He said that his staying at home and handling all the household chores became crucial support for Larissa's career. Thanks to this, she could devote herself 100% to developing the business and monitoring the company's well-being. Tim also mentioned that because he stayed home and supported his wife's dream, he couldn't pursue his career as he wanted to. He filed a counterclaim and requested compensation. After Tim filed this counterclaim, living together became unbearable. So, in July of the same year, he packed his belongings and moved into his own apartment. At that time, Larissa was away, and the man decided to take some pieces of furniture with him that, he claimed, also belonged to him. When the woman returned and realized this, she was furious. She told several friends and colleagues that she wanted Tim dead. Becoming a widow would be better for her than going through all these divorce proceedings. Larissa also said she would take everything from Timothy. She asked a colleague named Leslie for a favor to rent a storage unit near the laboratory under the pretext of wanting to keep some items out of Tim's reach. Leslie agreed to the request and rented the unit in her name, giving Larissa the access code. After that, Larissa asked a young man named James, who worked with her in the lab, to help take some items from Tim's house, claiming they were stolen. James thought it was fair. One day, taking advantage of the fact that Tim was away, the two of them broke into the house and took all the items that Larissa remembered being in their shared home. They took them to the storage unit rented by Leslie. When Tim returned home, he panicked. At first, he thought he had been robbed, but then, based on the missing items and the documents he had planned to provide for custody of his son, it became clear who was responsible. Afraid of his wife's subsequent actions, Tim decided to install a security system with motion detectors. Since he no longer had to take care of the house and children, he started working full-time at the hospital. He told some colleagues that he was frightened by Larissa's behavior and even obtained a permit to buy a gun for protection. To keep Tim in the same subdued position, a little later Larissa gained custody of Tyler. The man could only see his son twice a month on weekends. On Wednesday, July 9, 2003, 45-year-old Tim had dinner with his friends Mary, Bob, and Victor Muriba. It wasn't a joyful meeting, as both Mary and Tim had been fired from the hospital that day due to staff cuts, and they were scheduled to discuss their termination with the HR department at the health center the next day. After dinner, Tim and Mary agreed to have breakfast together the next day before going there. They said their goodbyes and each went home. It was the last time the friends saw Tim alive. The next day, Mary waited for Tim for breakfast, but he didn't show up for the meeting. She called him persistently, but he didn't answer his mobile phone. This was very strange, but she thought Tim might have overslept or already left for a business meeting, and she planned to meet him there. Mary attended the meeting about the medical center's layoffs, but Tim still didn't show up. He was very responsible and wouldn't miss such a meeting because it was crucial to wrap up his affairs at the hospital. She became very anxious and called Bob and Victor, as they were the last people he was with the previous night. Victor decided to visit Tim's apartment. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. Outside the building, he saw Tim's parked car. He looked inside and realized that his friend's mobile phone, wallet, and watch were lying there. This was also strange because Tim wouldn't go anywhere without his phone. He called Mary to inform her of the situation, and they decided to contact the police. They were very afraid that Tim might have taken his own life due to the divorce and the job loss. They wanted the police to enter the apartment and check if Tim was there, but the officer's response startled them. They were told to wait for 24 hours before considering it a disappearance. Only after that time could they start searching for Tim. The friends had no choice but to wait. On that day, Tim also didn't pick up Tyler, with whom he had a planned meeting. He was supposed to pick up his son at the place where Larissa usually got her manicures. The manicurist noticed that Larissa seemed very happy that day. Although quite nervous, she was sweating profusely, making it difficult to apply the nail glue. After 24 hours had passed since Tim's disappearance, and considering that he hadn't looked for Tyler, the first thing the police did was check his apartment. They found a weapon hidden under a chair cushion. It was obvious that he was afraid of something. When they checked his bag, they found a small cassette recorder with a tape. According to the caller ID list on his phone, the last call was made at 2 p.m. on the day of his disappearance, and it was from his ex-wife's phone. Therefore, Larissa was the first person called in for questioning. During the interview, she talked about the difficulties that came with the divorce and admitted that her last conversation with Tim was on July 8th, a Tuesday, as he was supposed to come and pick up Tyler. Tim and I were struggling because of the divorce, and it dragged on for a long time. It was difficult for us to communicate, so we hardly talked. I mean, there were times when we didn't talk for 3 weeks. Larissa planned that after spending the weekend with her son, Tyler, they would go on a trip to Disney and then to Missouri to visit family. She said that since Tim didn't show up to pick up their son and didn't answer her calls, she took the boy home. She mentioned that her last call was at 10:30 a.m. on July 9th. She also said that during the night, while watching a movie, she fell asleep on the couch with her phone. When she woke up, she saw that early in the morning on July 10th, there was a missed call from Tim's number on her phone's speed dial. I remember waking up on the couch, and I had my mobile phone. And it looked like I dialed a number or something like that. Both investigators asked for her mobile phone, but Larissa claimed she left it at home. This seemed very strange. One of the agents went out to get some fresh air. Larissa's car was parked at the entrance, and her mobile phone was inside. The officer dialed the number to confirm that it was Larissa's phone, and it was. He suspected she was hiding something on her phone. The agent returned to the interrogation room and told Larissa her phone was in the car. The officers accompanied her, and she retrieved the phone. Her behavior changed dramatically. She became very nervous, and her hands were shaking. Then, they asked her to allow them to inspect her phone. They noticed that Tim's number was missing from her speed dial, suggesting that she couldn't have called him by mistake. Eventually, Larissa admitted that she had lied. She had called Tim that morning to confirm that he would pick up Tyler in the morning. After that, she had no idea what happened to him. Despite this lie, the police stated that they had no evidence to detain her and released her, but not before checking her call history. They noticed that in the last few days, Larissa had persistently called one number. When they identified the owner of the number, they realized it was James Fagan, the same person who had helped Larissa move things out of Tim's apartment a few weeks ago. The police wanted to know the content of the calls between James Fagan and Larissa. They summoned the 21-year-old guy to testify. After some questions, he broke down in front of the officers and revealed everything that had happened. He said that Larissa took Tim's life that very morning she had called him. James disclosed that Larissa asked him to go back to Tim's apartment a second time after they had removed things from there a couple of weeks ago. She argued that Tim had robbed her again and she wanted her furniture back. James believed everything she said, so he agreed to go with her. Additionally, Larissa offered him $2,000. She also asked him to buy a stun gun. She said she needed it for extra protection in case Tim became aggressive. James accepted all of this. He recounted that on that morning, they went to Tim's house, Larissa rang the bell, and Tim let her in. Then, Larissa took the stun gun and completely immobilized her ex-husband. He said he didn't know what was supposed to happen to Larissa and Tim until she asked him to bring Tim to her house. There was a barrel in the shed, and she began filling it with acid. James told the police that they placed Tim inside the barrel and that he believed Tim was alive when they did it. The investigators believed him and confirmed that a few days ago, she had purchased a large barrel, had it delivered to the lab, and then moved it to the shed near her house. She also purchased a significant amount of hydrochloric and sulfuric acid, 4 boxes in total, each containing 6 bottles, 3 boxes of hydrochloric acid and 1 of sulfuric. The company only used 1 bottle per year for disinfecting some instruments in the laboratory. Additionally, one of Larissa's colleagues reported that on that Friday, July 10th, Larissa arrived at work after 10 a.m. She mentioned that her muscles were sore from exercising, which was very unusual because Larissa usually came in much earlier. After spending a few hours in the lab, Larissa said she needed to leave due to an emergency, and she didn't return for the rest of the day. Following all of this, the police obtained a search warrant for her home, the laboratory, and the rented storage unit. In the trash near her home, they found a box containing 6 empty bottles of hydrochloric acid. On Larissa's computer, they found a search history related to acids, tissues, and animal tissues. On July 16th, 6 days after Tim's disappearance, the police entered the rented storage unit and found a barrel containing half of Tim's body. Simultaneously with this discovery, an arrest warrant was issued for Larissa, and she was arrested a day later at the airport as she returned from Disney with her son and headed to her parents' house in Missouri. But Larissa had her own version of events. She blamed everything on James. Supposedly, James told Larissa that he went to Tim's house to rob him, but Tim caught him, so she just helped him hide the body. While all this was happening, a forensic examination of Tim's remains was conducted. Obtaining these samples was very challenging, so special suits had to be used due to the strong odor from the barrel. Only 2 bones from Tim's upper torso remained. His identity had to be confirmed through DNA analysis. A small trace of chloroform was found in the body tissues, but it couldn't be determined if Tim was still alive when placed in the barrel. According to the accusation, the investigation, and the available testimonies, on the tragic morning of July 10th, the following occurred. Larissa asked Tim to meet her at his house. She needed to come up with a convincing reason for him to easily open the door for her, bearing in mind that he had weapons at home and a surveillance system in place. Investigators believe that Larissa told Timothy that their son Tyler was ill, so they needed to meet. In any case, when Larissa called, Tim opened the door. James hid in a carefully chosen spot where Tim's cameras couldn't see him. When Tim opened the door, James emerged from his hiding place and incapacitated Tim. Larissa used the stun gun, although the police don't know exactly what caused Tim's death. What they learned from James' testimony was that they both lifted Tim and carried him to the car. It was quite difficult, given Tim's tall stature. They drove to Larissa's house and entered the shed. As James claimed, they put Tim into the barrel, and Larissa began pouring acid inside. Tim's legs protruded from the barrel, so according to James, Larissa cut them off. Since no bones from this part of Tim's body were left, this couldn't be confirmed, but ultimately, their only evidence was James' testimony. After this, Larissa asked James to close the barrel and then transport it to a storage unit. James complied. Later, Larissa showed up at work and, after a few hours, went to the shed to clean up all the evidence. James was also arrested by authorities. Hearings began in November 2006. The first trial took place for James. The defense argued that he was very afraid of Larissa, who had threatened him and always acted like a criminal. He was acquitted of the abduction charge, but found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. James' conviction brought good news for Larissa. James had no intention of testifying in court as he was busy with his appeal, and the prosecution couldn't offer him anything since he had already been sentenced to life in prison. Another positive development for Larissa was that the judge didn't allow the prosecution to present a recording in court where James confessed to the police. He argued that it would be impossible since the defense wouldn't have a chance to cross-examine James and question him, which would benefit neither side. On October 22, 2007, hearings began, consisting of 9 women and 3 men who ultimately had to decide Larissa's fate. Larissa's defense shifted all blame onto James. A forensic psychiatrist's report was presented, claiming that she had suffered extraordinary trauma and had become a victim of emotional violence from Tim. Larissa admitted that she had indeed told several people about her desire to see Tim dead, but claimed it was a way to cope with the pressure she felt due to Tim's custody suit and his demand for $1 million. However, she stated that she never meant it seriously. In court, Larissa stood by her last statement given to the police. She said that on July 11th, James came to her house, a day after Tim was supposed to have a work meeting. And when his friends went to the police to report his disappearance, James told Larissa that he went to Tim's house, but the robbery didn't go as planned. He used too strong a charge, and Tim was already not breathing. Larissa told the court that she was horrified by what she heard. She couldn't think clearly, and the last thing on her mind was going to the police and turning James in. The only thing she wanted was to help the young man. Then she remembered the barrel she had and the liters of hydrochloric and sulfuric acid she had bought earlier. Larissa commented that she made this purchase because she wanted to perform a thorough cleaning of all the laboratory equipment, and she would need a lot of acid for that. She told James to go to the apartment and retrieve Tim's body from there. They took him to the shed, put him in the barrel, and filled it with acid. Then James drove the barrel to the place where she kept her things. According to Larissa's account, this is how it all happened. However, the police never believed this version. They asked her about the $2,000 she transferred to James' account, and she replied that it was payment for various tasks he had done, including taking care of her son. Finally, the prosecution played nearly 24 voicemail messages that Larissa had sent to Tim. They contained horrific and demeaning insults and threatening remarks like, "You're such a weakling, spineless. That's who you are. I hate your character so much that I can't stand you. I hope you burn in hell." This revealed a horrifying rage that had consumed the defendant. After 2 days of deliberations, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder for financial gain. The prosecution argued that the woman eliminated her ex-partner in order to keep all the money for herself. On May 16, 2008, after several appeals, a sentence was handed down: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Larissa tried to appeal this sentence, but all appeals were rejected in 2011. Tyler continued to live with his maternal grandparents. They did not encourage any communication with his sister. Now Kristen is married and has a son. She confirms that she is not sure if her brother knows the full version of events, and furthermore, she doesn't know what story her grandparents told the boy. This case shows how ambitions can lead to such consequences. Due to the absence of a prenuptial agreement, the couple had to split everything equally, regardless of who contributed how much money or resources. Larissa didn't want that and chose to take her former husband's life, assuming that no one would notice. In the end, they would think he had gone missing or believe he had taken his own life due to existing problems. Ultimately, both she and her accomplice are imprisoned for life. The criminals were punished, but it remains unclear how this situation affected their younger son and whether he's aware of the entire situation. The family was torn apart by Larissa's selfish act.